You mentioned a couple of times there it's ostensibly Fletcher's last game. Should it be? What in the very, very limited sample size of one game so far, what have you seen from him? Could there be or should there be a place for him in this setup? Because he's occupied various roles at the club, not least as player, but taking all romance out of it, there's a lot of respect for him internally. He's been given a lot of credit this week for the approach in the FA Cup final 24, which was so successful.
Yeah.
There's
Bruno
obviously
nine. Yeah.
there's yeah, there's something there, isn't there? So what have you seen from him that you like?
Like you say, it's the small sample size issue, but it is our knowledge of Fletcher generally that kind of gives him credence, doesn't it? It kind of gives him a real chance. Um, Obviously, there's talk of Carrick and going back to Ollie, and there's pros and cons of those things, to put it lightly. But I think it gives him a real chance. I think they'd be mad not to think about it. I think they've got to forget his role in the club at the moment and say, what have we seen? We've seen the right starting 11. These are important things. He could have been tempted with a Xerxes or starting Mount when he's not fit, and he could have put Lacey on and tried to. I always remember. And Lee Carsley, and he throws on all the tens, for his one game, and you had the Palmers, the Fodens, and you think, no, 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 no. So there could have been um, the impulse to do something like that, and there wasn't. So I think, fair play. I think there could have been an impulse to throw Yoro in instead of Heaven, but I think it was correct to play Heaven last night. And then he's got the formation right, 4-2-3-1. Because I don't think we're ready for 4-3-3 just yet. And the substitutions are then correct. He's pre-planned a mount for Bruno one. He's been bold. He's decided to chase the game by, eventually we've not got Ugarte and Casemiro sitting in. It's it finishes as Mount and Mainu in that central midfield because we've got possession of the ball. We're building with that 2-3 box one. We're providing with the fullbacks quite lopsided at times, although Shaw did get beyond Dorgu at times. Dorgu's coming inside well. Dorgu had a couple of shots. We're seeing more crosses from him already. Or shall we say crosses from better positions from the Dane. We saw Sesko's movement, which I'm led to believe was a video analysis session from Darren. Just him one to one. That's fantastic. Now Amrin would have done certain things like that as well. Um, but that's brilliant all in the space of 4 or 5 days. It's fantastic work, and we saw that movement with Sesko. We saw him coming in and out. We saw him making breaking that last line. We saw him for want of a better word, one and two touch outside the area. He was doing too many flicks for my liking at one point, but that was clearly a tactical instruction. And we saw the header that was tipped over the bar. We've seen a turn and shot. We've seen the nice pass to Martinez, which we've not talked about, where that was a perfectly legitimate goal. That was a lovely pass by Shesko. Martinez turns and shoots Shesko fashion actually, and it was never a foul on Kyle Walker. I don't know what's going on there. It was delaying the whistle in case VAR was going to overrule him. Um, so yeah, I think we've seen a lot. We saw Kobe come in the right position, and trying to dictate play from the centre. We saw the Lacey substitution, which yeah, listen, it goes back to the Fergie interview. If I'm losing or drawing last 10, I'm gonna put my attackers on. I'm gonna replace a defender with an attacker, and that was pretty much the blueprint, but not in a naive point of view. So that was really encouraging, and I guess we might talk about it another time. But he's then, the board have got to look at what do they want. Do they want this expansive 4-2-3-1 that Darren showed them already? As I say, very Maresca-like in his, wide two centre backs in the build and dominating the central progressions. Or do you want an Ollie Solskjaer who's very much not counter-attacking coach is sent, overall, but someone who does rely on your standard 4-2-3-1, high full backs, letting the players decide on the edge of the opponent's penalty area. There's fluidity there. There's sometimes a lack of cohesion, if I'm being honest, and then a lack of cohesion in the out of possession stuff under Solskjaer, which led to, a terrible defensive record when you look at the end of his reign. And then there's Carrick as well. I love Michael Carrick, one of my favourite ever players um, for Manchester United, and he's more possession based. He's more building with a three and a two, or a four and a two, and working his way. Yes, there's central progressions. Yes, there's rotations from the fullbacks and the wide players, but he is more waiting for that opening. Where it's more horizontal and less vertical than we've seen from Fletcher. So, without, I don't want to get too hyperbolic, but there was some really good vertical play, narrow width overall, which is good, which condensed the play, and then looking to get balls in behind Burnley's back line. And, you know, only a sample size of one game, but we know of Fletcher's work in the 18s, and it's really, really good. Um, it's at least the equal to Ollie's work and to Carrick's work.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, from history tells us that co-managers never really work out. But in terms of the interim, could you see between now and the end of the season almost like a two or three man setup? You know, maybe one kind of nominal head coach with one or two senior recognizable assistants behind him. Could you see that kind of duo or trio possibly happening?
It's interesting, isn't it? My head says one thing and my heart says another. My heart
Mm.
says, yeah, let's do it. It's going to be Ollie or Carrick with Fletcher and the other one, behind. My head says it just doesn't work, like you've said, Steve. And that goes throughout all walks of life. The business world straight away. You think of the argument at Apple. You think of the argument at Microsoft, and Bill finally transpiring. Google have had it with Larry. So it happens. Formula One. If you watch Formula One, you can't have anyone above the lead director. So, or to the side, so shall I say? So it's interesting. It really is interesting. I heard this morning Carrick would be willing to be Ollie's number two if he doesn't get the number one job. I mean, Michael, why did you say that? Come on, let you go for it. You go for number one, or you don't get number one, and it's a really interesting one. I don't know. Then you're taking Fletcher out of the 18s to become an assistant. Yeah, I don't know. My heart says, yeah, brilliant. Three X Reds in place. My head's saying we need something a little more innovative. So I'm already surprised that they're the only three candidates up for the role, if I'm being brutally honest. And on the Ollie one in particular, the way the rain ended, and we have to forget that initial manager bump, which is what most people can't do. Um, it was a dreadful last 10 to 12 games, and notwithstanding just the Liverpool defeat, and that very open formation once we'd attacked, the out possession stuff needed a hell of a lot of work. And at times Ollie looked deflated, and we've had too much of that with Amarim. So it is a worry, but obviously I'm behind anything we go for. It's just a worry that the board seem to not look at more innovative solutions, seem to fall into the same traps time and time again, particularly in the last 24 months.
I mean, there's a very real danger that this will sort of age the piece because we're expecting developments at any given time. But if let's say it was a smokescreen and they weren't just looking at the get an ex player back, where would you be looking? Obviously, Maresca's on the market now. Anyone else that you think it just screams out, yeah, nice temporary solution?
Well, to be honest with you, Steve, I've not given that much thought, given that the onus has been on these three ex players, and then people have talked about Roy Keane. I don't think he'd take that, and I don't think it would work. I don't think Maresca would take that as an interim. So that's up for the board. That you'd hope there's always a succession strategy. So that's my kind of on the fence answer to that, because you hope that they're looking into this. I mean, someone mentioned Motta. from Italy. There's definitely more options than than X Reds and bringing that kind of emotion back in the DNA. And although part of me agrees with that, there is something about the attacking DNA of Manchester United and a four at the back. There has to be something else, even if it's just for interview's sake. There has to be something else. And I'm not talking, something bonkers, but Motta was one that intrigued me. And there's two or three other managers out of a job, and I don't think Xavi would take that on a caretaker basis. So yeah, let's see how that plays out. We all have a feeling how that will play out, which is what you've alluded to. Um, let's hope it doesn't backfire because again, if Ollie and Carrick do well, and they finish third or fourth, I mean, then you have to offer them the permanent role, and then we're back in that vicious cycle again where this happened after the PSG result, of course, and the big clamour for Ollie to take it permanently, and we can't be back at that situation again. It would just honestly, it would just waste the 5-6 years, and we'd potentially be looking at another 5-6 years of managerial rotations.
Just to play devil's advocate on that, I mean, with Ollie, yeah, there's you tend to find people concentrating too much on the start, and in my opinion, too much on the end. If you look at the middle, there was a progression. There was always the sense of the working towards being more than a counter-attacking team. Obviously he got a lot of credit for shutting down Pep City a number of times and going and getting really favourable record against one of the best managers ever. But if you look at his final season, 21-22, I've never shaken the feeling that there was something, they had all preseason, they had the first couple of games of the season where something was building, they laid out a strategy for how it was going, the evolution was going to continue. And then Ronaldo either parachutes in with his blessing or gets parachuted in. And it is a complete outlier in the approach, really, isn't it? I mean, that season, don't get me wrong, Cristiano individually went on, he was top scorer, did superbly, brilliant. But it wasn't it wasn't a good fit. You have an opinion. It wasn't a good fit, was it? It's when you get a mega star coming in with in terms of a manager has to command respect or head coach has to command respect to the players, but Ronaldo had unequivocal respect of every player in that dressing room, more so than probably any manager you could have brought in. So it didn't serve Ollie, did it, having him brought in at that stage?
It it didn't. A few things I'd throw back. Uh, Going back to your question around progression and possession, that was very late on in the piece, and that was largely by by virtue of it had to do something different. The counter-attacking football wasn't working. We didn't have the fullbacks for that. When we were in the final third, there was definitely a lack of instruction, and that can be go and do your piece, right? But we then started to look at better build patterns, and that's why it happened. And then, of course, there was the retraction. But even the bit you said was good. So, obviously pushing City. I'd argue the other way. We had such a poor start that season, we let City run away with it. So you then say, okay, you're second or third, but you're trying to effectively, you were in that pack of not even chase. City was so far ahead by that point that the rest of the pack just gave up. So there's no surprise that we then finished second and third. It's it was we sometimes look at it the wrong way. Everyone's talking about league position finish. And sometimes there's no reflection on what happened that season. It was 20 points behind already. It was some terrible results, particularly at home against weaker team, which of course we've seen at the moment. Last is it seven, the bottom seven, we've dropped points against with Amarim and now obviously Fletcher against Burnley. So I get that that's been repetitive, but that was something Ollie couldn't get to grips with. That was something where we needed, that fluidity in attack and to finish teams off at home, and he couldn't do that. And then yes, we've somehow finished above the chasing pack on goal difference. There's certainly a lot more to that. And then when you look at I mean, he said since the Ronaldo thing was a mistake, and he had a part to play in that. He was very much pro bringing Ronaldo in, and he advised the board on that. I'm not saying he chose on his own. I'm not saying that, but he did have consultation about Ronaldo's return, and he was saying when someone like that comes knocking, you have to bring him in. Well, no, every single tactician and analyst up and down, the country and Europe wide said there's no good bringing Ronaldo back at this point. He's not going to be able to do the out of possession stuff. He's not going to be able to press. I remember Jonathan Wilson said this is again the end of Manchester United's hopes bringing Ronaldo back, and he got huge criticism. But that's what analysts get is criticism because we tend to be a bit too cold-hearted and too cerebral. I mean cerebral over emotion. I mean I don't mean anything else. So and that sadly was I would say even further downfall for Ollie, not the start of his downfall. And then also, Steve, when do we ever go back in anything? In anything, you name me one thing. You name me one idea, one sport, one, you just name me one thing where that happens and it works. You might say Michael Jordan when he gave up his fanciful idea of a baseball player, yeah, but you don't go back. You just don't.
Yeah, you took the only good example there. Never mind. Um, no, I mean, we'll see what happens. Obviously, the wind seems to be blowing a certain direction at the moment.
And I hope he does well if he does come in. I love him to bits, right? But
Of course,
not the
and
point. That's not the point. Yeah.
no, of course, and it is it's a temporary fix, whatever it is. Um, Hopefully that will become clear very, very soon, and then we can start looking further ahead because, as you say, there has to be a strategy, a succession plan for the long term now.
Yeah.
We're not too long term because maybe we're as supporters think we've been spoiled with two dynasties, haven't we? Busby, Ferguson. Which other club has had two managers come in and do what they did over the course of 20 years? Maybe that sets unrealistic expectations. Like David
Totally
Moyes
smart.
coming. Yeah, David Moyes coming in on a 6-year contract straight away. Madness. Maybe we need to temper things a little bit, but certainly we have to be looking longer term than just the end of this season. So we'll reconvene, you and I, and go through the contenders or who we certainly should be looking for. Because I think we agree on that, a lot of it. There's a number of contenders being linked at the moment. They're already in the Premier League, which don't really get my juices flowing. But hey, we can, like I say, reconvene and go through that later today. But in the meantime, Nik, thank you very much for joining. As ever, lovely to see you. And yeah, see you soon.
Thank you, Steve.